So there's a concept in Ayurveda that's called the doshas, and what dosha means is literally something that is a fault, something that causes problems. And so the doshas are there. It's not like we're going to get completely rid of them, but when they increase, generally they cause problems. And the understanding of the doshas is based on the elements. So there's air and space, which is vata dosha. There's water and fire, which is pitta dosha, and there is water and earth, which is kapha. And you can think of it primarily as like earth for kapha, fire for pitta, and then air and space for vata. And so what this means is air and space is the concept of space, empty space, and movement, right? So we all have movement in our bodies and in our minds. Your muscles move. There's peristalsis, which is your digestive tract. There's nerve signals that move along your nerves. So this is the concept of movement, vata dosha. Pitta dosha is primarily fire, but in our body it mixes with water. So we have digestive acid in our body, and this is a manifestation of pitta dosha. Pitta also governs sight, because we can't see without the fire of the sun, without the light. So fire and sight are linked together. It's very much also related to inflammation in the body, any heat, fire, inflammation, again. Kapha is, as I said, earth and water. So we don't really have anything in our body that is completely solid, completely earth. That would be like a problem, like a stone, like a kidney stone or something. That's complete earth, and that's not supposed to be there, right? It's a pathology. But we do have things that are solid in our body, like muscle and bone, and then bone also has space in it. So the spaces in the joints would be more vata. So these are the three doshas, and they everybody has them all, but most of us have a little bit more of one or the other. So the one that predominates is the one that is going to give you the most trouble. And applying the opposite to it, not the opposite dosha, but applying opposite of elements, is what's going to help to resolve and bring balance. So for example, vata dosha, air and space. So I was talking in a previous video about digestion and gas in the digestive tract. This is vata. It's a manifestation of vata dosha, excess air, excess movement. So you can treat that or balance that through things that are grounding and balancing and nurturing. So warm foods that are well cooked, well spiced, keeping the body warm. Everybody, according to Ayurveda, should stay away from cold drinks, but especially vata. Stay away from cold drinks, stay away from cold foods. If you do have them, like a salad is a cold food, if you do have it, make sure that you add a lot of oil. Raw fruits generally are not that good for vata. Again, you know, if they are very, very moist fruits, then it's probably okay, but you want to like cook your fruit, or even have it with a little bit of honey. Don't cook your honey, but you can have fruit with a little honey. And then we have pitta dosha. Pitta dosha is fire. So excess fire is going to manifest in very soft stools. It's going to manifest in heat in the digestive tract. It's going to manifest in inflammation on the skin. So according to Ayurveda, if you have inflammation on your skin, it's related to what's happening in your digestive tract. If you have like an acidic reflux, burning sensation, this is also excess pitta. So you would apply things that are generally things that are cooling. So pitta is fire and water. So you're going to generally apply things that are cooling to like more air, more bitter taste. And actually water is not water, just plain water, but like foods that are moist are good, but as long as they're not too spicy. And pitta has the strongest digestion. So that's the one that maybe would be better with raw foods, but again, be careful because raw foods do have a lot of fiber and they can aggravate vata. So because even if you're predominantly pitta, you'll have a lot of vata. And then aggravating vata can also cause problems in your pitta dosha. Kapha dosha, this is the earth and water, is heaviness. And so the problems that people with kapha dosha tend to experience would be like swelling, excess weight gain, lethargy, maybe even like a brain fog or fatigue, difficulty with alertness and focus. And so this is earth and water. It's a heaviness. So you want to have, for this particular dosha, a lighter diet, eating foods that are lighter. But again, we want to stay away from raw foods. So like soupy kind of foods would be better for this dosha, and avoiding too much of dairy products for sure. And it's good to have some whole grains, but you don't want to have excess, and definitely no processed foods. And again, processed foods are not good for any of these, for anyone. And I'm talking commercially processed, not things like live fermented foods and things like that. That's a little different. But commercially processed foods, if it's coming from a bag or a box, like a cereal, those aren't really good for anyone. Chips, it's old, it's stale food, it's not even fresh. We want to all say, and so then I'll go over the things that are good for everyone, since I'm talking about that. So staying away from processed foods, staying away from leftovers, because food gives us energy, it gives us prana, and there's more prana the more alive something is, right? So when our body doesn't have prana in it, it's no longer alive. And plants or animals, even they're eating, they're full of prana. When you cook them, it's just been freshly cooked and you eat it, you get some of that prana. When you cook it and you put it in the refrigerator for a while, it loses a lot of that prana. And the same thing happens, of course, with processed foods, like canned foods, very little prana, if any. So you might get some, you'll get some energy from those foods, obviously, some nutrition from those foods, but you really won't have that vitality, and it'll be a heavier kind of energy. So we want to stay away from leftovers. And I know that's a big one for a lot of people, but it is really important. We want to try to eat seasonal foods that are seasonal in the area in which we live. So the foods that are growing around you at that time. And people ask me sometimes, how do you know what foods grow around you? And that's the problem. One of the problems is we're so detached from nature. We're so detached from the world around us. And it's interesting, but you can find out if you go to a farmer's market, if local, farmers are there, whatever they're selling, then that's usually going to be what's growing at that time. Although I have seen sometimes at farmer's market, people bringing in things from other places. So you want to inquire and see if it's grown locally. And usually it is, but you want to eat the foods that are grown locally. Now, one thing also that people say, well, if you live in a place that has a long winter where there's no growing season, what would be grown locally during that time? Well, not much. So then during that time, you would eat the things that are storage crops. So root vegetables, these are storage crops that stay good for a long period of time. The harder fruits like apples or pears, apples primarily, but they stay good and you can eat them and store them for a longer period of time. Grains, and so grains might seem like, a whole grain, that it doesn't have prana, right? Because it's sitting for a long time. But the thing is with a grain is it's actually seed, right? So if you soak a grain, it will sprout and you can grow a plant from it. So it has a lot of prana in it, but the prana is kind of in a suspended state. So something like, for example, quinoa. You have quinoa and it's not going to sprout if you have it dry sitting in your cupboard. So what you want to do with grains is soak them before you cook them, and that wakes the prana up, and it also removes something. There's a coating on it. It's a chemical thing, but it's what keeps it shelf stable. It's what keeps it from growing basically until the water comes. So once the water comes, that is removed and the seed can kind of start to sprout. You don't have to sprout it completely before you cook it, but at least soak it So it's going to remove this, it's what it's called is phytic acid. It's going to remove this phytic acid, and what that does is it gives your body access to the nutrition that's in that seed, versus before where that nutrition was protected with the phytic acid. And if you eat the food and cook the food without soaking it, without removing this phytic acid, it can actually leach minerals out of your body because of the way it's constructed, and it can become an anti-nutrient, and this can also cause nutritional deficiencies in people. So those are the things that are apply to pretty much everyone in food. And the other thing is timing. Timing of eating is so important. So we want to avoid, so generally I'm assuming that you're following a sleep schedule, which is another thing that's recommended by Ayurveda. So it's recommended that you wake up around sunrise, actually really about 45 minutes before sunrise, but we can just say around sunrise to make it simple, and then go to bed before 10 p.m. like 9 to 10 p.m. That's the recommendation. And if you're following that, then your eating times would be 8 a.m. and then midday between like 12 and 2, and then evening you want to stop eating at least 2 to 3 hours before you go to bed. And generally, to get a little more specific, you would want to avoid eating after sunset, because the sun corresponds to the sun in our body, or the heat in our body. The heat in our body is what breaks down the food, what digests the food. And so actually, it's recommended to have your main meal when the sun is at its height, middle of the day. 12 to 2, we should be eating our largest meal, maybe something light in the evening and something light in the morning, and 8 a.m. is the best time for breakfast generally if you're waking up with the sun. So again, there's some variation with these, and you might need to vary things based on your schedule, but this is the recommendation for the best digestion and the best nutrition.